Dead deer. Second maggot story. A few of my old contacts have emailed me asking if I would post the story of my second encounter with maggots. It's been about 2 years since it happened, and I had written about it the next day on my Multiply page. Unfortunately, Multiply deleted that page. I lost the story and everything. I hadn't kept a copy because I did everything from a computer at work. It's all gone. A lot of detail fades over time, but I tried my best to rewrite the experience. Once I got started, some of it came back to me, and I ended up really enjoying it. I'm glad I took the time. Hopefully, I haven't misremembered anything important. It happened on a Sunday afternoon while I was driving back home from Milwaukee. I can't remember now whether it was the weekend of Summerfest or Labor Day, but it was one of those two. As I mentioned, the following Monday night, I wrote the whole thing out at work and uploaded it to my Multiply page. I even got brave and took some pictures before my hands got too dirty. I uploaded a couple of those to the page too, only the ones that I felt safe showing. Not a lot of me in them, not a lot of my flabby, disgusting pale body in them, actually. I really wish I had even those few back. Multiply didn't respond to my email when I asked. Anyway, I was driving home on some other highway besides I-94 because I expected there would probably be a traffic jam after the state line. The weather was hot, humid, and sunny. I wish I had remembered what road it was, but I don't anymore. I haven't been back. I noticed a smell. A really bad smell. I knew it was the smell of something decaying. The smell got stronger and then faded away as I drove, but it kind of stuck in my nose. It stuck with me long enough to get my imagination going, and after a few seconds I made the mental connection between the odor, a dead animal, maggots, and all of a sudden I was looking for a spot to turn the car around. It was a stupid thing to do, I knew, but I didn't have anything specific in mind, just the idea that there might be something putrid and interesting to see. I remember stopping on the shoulder of the highway, at the point where the odor seemed strongest, and I felt kind of disappointed in myself. I'd been a good girl for a long time, ever since I recovered from my dumpster adventure with maggots that put me in the hospital, but now I was not feeling very much like a good girl. But my imagination was getting ahead of me. At that point I still didn't know where the rotting smell was coming from. There was a ditch and a grass embankment along either side of the highway, a few patches of trees, and cornfields. I knew from how strong the odor was that it had to be something nearby. But as I got out of my car, I wondered how I would find it. I was clever enough to notice the direction of the warm breeze, so I knew I needed to be on the other side of the highway. I remember I was wearing a white, hippie-like sundress with yellow and pink flowers on it, and a pair of sandals. I knew the sandals weren't ideal for poking around in the tall grass, but I figured I wasn't going to try too hard anyway. Crossing the highway, I knew I shouldn't be doing this, but I was letting my darker side drag me along, pretending I couldn't help it. I wanted to convince myself that I was just curious, but I was getting horny just imagining what I might find. I looked all around me as I walked along the shoulder of the highway, trying not to miss anything hidden under bushes and stuff. For a few minutes, I tried to be sensible and force myself to just go back to my car and forget about it. I wanted to be good. I really did. I marched myself back across the highway. On the other hand, I thought, well, maybe it wasn't so bad just to look. Standing by the car, I figured I had walked away once now. I could do it again. I noticed the canvas bag I had left in my back seat, which had my beach stuff and my little camera in it. Maybe I could just take some pictures of whatever I found. I grabbed the bag and crossed the highway again to keep looking. After a few minutes of searching, it was pretty obvious to me that the smell wasn't coming from anything along the embankment. There was only one area left to search, and there I found what I hoped to find. What I was afraid I'd find. At the corner of one of the cornfields, there was an old billboard, behind which was a patch of trees and bushes. The trees hid a shaded, kind of secluded area right behind the billboard. Pushing past the bushes, I found, lying in the dirt, the decomposing body of a deer. The smell was almost more than I could handle at first. but I had to stop and stare. I had no idea whether it was a male or a female. Any difference had already been consumed by decay and maggots. I thought, oh no. The fur of the deer had begun to come off in places, especially around the head, revealing the skin underneath, which had a greasy-looking texture, mostly black but with splotches of gray, brown, and greenish-gray. The deer's belly had split open almost the entire length, from its chest all the way down between its hind legs. The deer was lying sort of on its side, so that its right legs were sticking up in the air, and its left legs were on the ground. I guess the deer might have been killed or died, and the farmer just dragged the carcass to a spot where it could rot away. The open belly of the deer was a huge mass of maggots. There had to be thousands of them, grayish-brown maggots writhing and churning and filling every part of the open belly. Maggots even covered part of the ground on the side the deer leaned towards, probably consuming whatever fluids were oozing from the body. Little black beetles crawled among the maggots, and dozens of flies buzzed around the carcass. I set my bag down and stood staring at the carcass, completely mesmerized. I felt myself beginning to feel really horny again. This had to be one of the most disgusting, nauseating things I had ever seen. I want this, I thought. I want to be its whore, because I'm a depraved, filthy pig, and this is what I deserve. I have no choice. These are the thoughts I'm having while I continue to stand there with my mouth hanging open. My dress is suddenly hiked up, and one hand is in my panties. Stop now, I tell myself. Just take some pictures and leave. I want to take some really close pictures of the maggots, but I'm afraid to kneel down because of my dress. Of course I can't be wearing the dress, I thought. It'll get dirty. And now I had my excuse to remove it. Within a few moments I had taken all of my clothes off. The sundress and my underwear were draped over the branches of a large bush. I laid my beach blanket on the ground next to the deer. It felt so erotic to me to be nude outdoors, so near this nauseating, stinking carcass. Flies landed on my skin. It felt like they were inviting me. I took a bunch of pictures of the deer and the maggots, some really close up. I took the remote off my camera and set the camera down on one part of the frame of the billboard, and took more pictures that showed some of me in them near the maggots. I even took one where I was touching the maggots with my finger. It felt warm, but I was still really grossed out by it. I hadn't even seen a maggot since my last experience. A car went by on the highway. It startled me, but not for very long. I was feeling pretty secure now in my little hiding place with my new friend. The secluded area was almost disturbingly perfect. Even though I was pretending to be in control of myself, I kind of knew, from the moment I'd found the deer, that I was going to do something stupid. I stood up and stepped over the carcass with one leg, staring down into the seething mass of maggots. I felt like such a worthless, perverted piece of shit to be aroused by the sight. But I was so aroused. I was soaking wet. There was no way I could control what I did now. I had to feel them again. I needed it. I squatted down above the carcass, feeling one of the deer's hind legs against my lower back. Forcing back the urge to gag again, I removed my fingers from my vagina and sank them into the thick mass of maggots in front of me. I could feel the heat below the surface of the mass as they squirmed around my fingers. I stopped for a moment to think about what I was doing, but like an addict, I couldn't stop myself. I really tried. Sort of. Naked with the decomposing animal carcass, staring at the writhing, disgusting maggots, I felt like I'd never been so horny in all my life. I had lifted my hand out of the maggot mass and held it in front of my face, looking at all the maggots that clung to my skin. I felt my stomach rising into my throat and barely avoided gagging once again. Instead, I slowly brought my hand down between my legs and pressed my maggot-covered fingers between my vaginal lips. No, I whispered to myself, beginning to weep a little. My eyes were tearing up. How could I do this to myself again? I'm not a human being, I thought. I'm lower than a pig. I'm not even an animal. I'm garbage. I'm waste. My heart was pounding and I could feel the maggots squirming between my fingers and my pussy, and it's disgusting and it feels so good. And then I had a sudden realization that I had no idea what kind of maggots these were. They might not just eat dead tissue, like blowfly maggots. The thought made my clit pulse hard against my hand. Oh no, I thought, dropping to my knees, so I was kneeling just above the carcass with my legs spread wide apart. These maggots, they might bite me. They might burrow into me, infest me for real. I felt so much need right then. I scooped up a handful of maggots in my shaking hand and pressed them against and into my vagina. I began to orgasm. I felt so good and so disgusting at the same time. I didn't want to stop. I shoveled another handful of maggots into my vagina, and then another, and then another. I plunged my hand back into the maggot mass, deeper this time, grabbing and tugging at the decaying, partially liquefied guts beneath. No longer covered by the maggots, the odor of the decay was so strong it forced me to drop the unidentifiable glob of entrails I held in my hand. But I should have that inside me too, I thought. It's what I need, what I deserve. I picked the repulsive piece of deer guts back up and pushed it entirely into my vagina, crushing and pushing aside numerous maggots. I was panting now, feeling drunk with arousal. There was no stopping myself now, I knew, as I allowed myself to sink my fat, flabby ass down into the carcass, burying my pussy in maggots and decay. I could feel both solid and soft things beneath me, along with the constant wriggling of thousands of maggots. I began to hump my pussy against something firm, whatever it was, buried deep under the maggots. I felt like I was going out of my mind, now totally reveling in the horror of what I was doing to myself, grinding my hips and thrusting my infested cunt into the carcass as hard as I could. Maggots were oozing out of my vagina as I thrashed about. I did my best with shaking hands to cram them back inside. I clutched at anything beneath me, maggots, guts, and even some little black beetles, anything to pollute myself inside even worse. I kept humping and humping against the carcass, unable to stop even if I wanted to. A new, strong orgasm overcame me, making my head spin. As I climaxed, I let myself slowly fall forward, my tummy coming down to lie on the open belly of the carcass, with my fat ass still humping uncontrollably against the rotting guts. I realized my face was now close to the deer's head. With my finger, I gently poked the maggots infesting the deer's eye socket. I watched them writhe as my orgasm faded. And then I surprised myself. I usually feel really bad after I've done something sick and perverse. Kind of a mix of defeat, guilt, disgust, disappointment. This time I didn't. I felt filthy, but still very erotically filthy. I was at the bottom. I'd become the repulsiveness that I was getting off on. Reluctantly lifting myself off of the deer carcass, I sat for a few minutes catching my breath, feeling both the exhausted throbbing between my legs and the crawling of the little beast still clinging to my skin. I wiped off my hands on the beach towel and picked up the camera remote. I took a couple pictures of myself with my boobs, my belly, my crotch, and my thighs completely smeared with disgusting slime, bits of decaying deer guts, and lots of maggots. I could still feel maggots moving in my vagina too. As violent as I'd been, I hadn't killed them all. Infested inside and out, I didn't want the feeling to go away. Moving as carefully as I could to keep from squeezing anything out of my vagina, I got dressed without removing any of the filth on me. I drove the rest of the way home with my beach towel covering the driver's seat. I had my fingers in my panties several times, playing with my clit and feeling the tiny monsters that continued to squirm between my legs. I didn't come at all, but I stayed close to it. Incredibly, I never became sick or had any infection from the experience. Maybe because I got in the bathtub and cleaned myself really well as soon as I was home. My sundress, bra, panties, and beach towel all went into the trash. No big loss. What I really miss is the pictures I took.